I remember the moment the invitation arrived. It came in an envelope so carefully chosen it felt more like a performance than a gesture. Cream-colored cardstock, gold lettering, a wax seal with my parents' initials, as if trying too hard to convince me that this time, things would be different. It wasn't the wedding itself that unsettled me. It was the note scribbled at the bottom by my mother in her unmistakable, looping script. "We're all so proud of Nathan. We hope you'll be able to help with the accommodations, darling. Let's talk soon." I stared at that line for a long time. Help with the accommodations. There it was again, that familiar tug. The way my family always dangled closeness like a treat, like something I had to earn, usually by giving something up. Ever since I bought my penthouse, something in them had shifted. My success, which I worked tooth and nail for, became a quiet problem no one named but everyone resented. I used to think I was imagining it. The way my mother would refer to my place as that little show-off apartment. Or how my father always had a new story about how real wealth was about humility, not viewpoints and granite counters. But deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't like seeing me stand on my own. They especially didn't like that I did it without needing them, or their approval. Still, IRSVPD yes, because it was Nathan's wedding. And despite everything, he was my brother. We were never close. He was always the golden child, the heir to all their affection, while I was the daughter who thought too much and took things too personally. But there was a part of me, foolish or hopeful, that thought maybe this wedding would soften something in them. Maybe for once I wouldn't have to play defense. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were filled with group chats, dress fittings, and long threads of wedding logistics. I stayed polite, present, but distant. I offered to help with things that didn't cross the line, floral arrangements, transport, the playlist. But every so often there it was again, the not-so-subtle pressure about lodging. Nathan and Kali somewhere elegant for their honeymoon week. "You live alone in such a big place, Issa," my mother said on a call, her tone syrupy. "Wouldn't it be lovely if they could just start their married life surrounded by beauty?" I dodged. I said I'd think about it. I changed the subject. But I felt it building, a silent, rehearsed expectation. Like a storm they were waiting to unleash, the wedding day came. Warm sunshine, perfect blue skies, a venue so expensive it made my eyes water. I arrived early, wearing the blush-toned gown I'd been assigned, and found my seat. People hugged me, complimented my hair, smiled wide. But underneath the surface, I felt like a marked woman. It was during the pre-ceremony gathering that the real moment happened. My mother approached with 2 glasses of champagne. Her smile was so tight it looked painful. "Walk with me," she said. So I did. She led me to a side hallway near the garden entrance, where my father and Nathan were already waiting. I knew immediately this wasn't going to be about seating arrangements. We wanted to ask something important. My father said, skipping any pretense, "We think the best gift you could give Nathan and Kali is your penthouse, at least for a year, just until they get on their feet. You don't need all that space, and it would be such a beautiful gesture." I blinked. The words didn't register at first. "I'm sorry, what?" Nathan chimed in. "You're always saying how it's lonely up there. You worked so much, you're never home. This would actually help you too." I looked at him, at all of them. There was no irony in their eyes. They genuinely believed this was reasonable. Even generous of them to offer me the chance. "I'm not giving away my home," I said, as calmly as I could. My mother's smile vanished like a curtain falling. "So you're really going to be that selfish? On his wedding day?" "I'm not being selfish," I replied. "I'm protecting what I built." Then came the switch. It was always fast with my father. 1 second calm, the next. A wave of disappointment and shame crashing over me like it had all those years ago when I first said, "I didn't want to take over the family business." "We raised you better than this," he muttered. "You're humiliating yourself. You're humiliating us." My pulse pounded in my ears. I suddenly felt 14 again. The room grew smaller. But I stood still. I'm not the one ambushing a family member at a wedding with a demand that sounds more like a robbery. I said. My mother stepped closer, voice low, almost hissing. "You're going to regret this, Isabella. You'll regret saying no." That was the moment it snapped. Not in me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I simply looked my father in the eyes and said, "You just lost me. Then I turned and walked back into the main hall, heart racing but spine straight. Behind me, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no apologies. Just silence. And in that silence I found something stronger than their approval. Peace. The first time I realized my family resented my apartment wasn't during a fight, or even in something overt. It was in the way my mother paused before calling it a home. She used to say things like, "That place of yours?" Or, "Your little glass tower?" As if saying penthouse out loud would acknowledge that I had achieved something she didn't quite approve of. At first, I brushed it off as her usual passive tone. My parents have always had a strange relationship with success. They love the idea of it, as long as it fits neatly within their narrative. As long as it doesn't belong to someone they still see as the rebel daughter who didn't follow their plan. When I first bought the penthouse, it wasn't out of some desire to show off. It was survival. I had spent years in apartments that were too small, too loud, too temporary. Years working jobs where I was talked over, underestimated, patronized. The penthouse wasn't a prize, it was proof that I could build something permanent, that I didn't need to shrink anymore to make others comfortable. But from the moment I signed those papers, it was like a subtle war began at family gatherings. "You're really going to live there alone?" My father asked the first time he visited, scanning the view like it was something to be suspicious of. "You should rent out the top floor, at least." "No sense wasting all that space on yourself," my brother had chimed in, not even trying to hide his tone. They said it with smiles, with laughter, but I heard it, every dig, every attempt to make it seem excessive, ridiculous, lonely. They weren't proud. They were offended, and that offense slowly turned into strategy. Small things at first, hints that Nathan and Callie were looking for a place to settle down, jokes about how some people have more space than they know what to do with. They never asked directly, not until the wedding. But I saw it building. Like pressure behind a dam. I remember one Thanksgiving, the year before the wedding, my mother pulled me aside while washing dishes and said, "You know, if you ever get tired of that echo chamber of an apartment, you should let your brother take a look. It would be such a great place for them to start a family." I blinked. "Start a family? In my home?" "Oh, honey, it's not like you use it all," she said with a soft, weaponized smile. "And wouldn't it be nice to have a baby's laughter echoing through that big space?" It wasn't about the apartment, not really. It was about what it represented, that I had built something without their help, that I had become something they didn't understand and couldn't control. From the outside, my life looked pristine. Expansive windows, clean lines, artwork I had collected over years of work. But inside, I kept my world very quiet. I didn't host much. I didn't bring family over often, because I knew that every visit came with inventory, eyes scanning, minds calculating, judgments forming. Callie was the worst of them. My soon-to-be sister-in-law never missed a chance to call it too minimalist, or say that cold colors don't feel like home. She once joked during a brunch that it looked like a showroom for rich people with no kids, and my mother laughed, loud and too long. I was used to it. Used to being the outsider in my own bloodline. But the apartment made it worse. It made the division tangible, concrete, something they could see and covet and talk about behind my back. When the wedding invite came, with that note about accommodations, I already knew where it was headed. They didn't want to borrow my space. They wanted to claim it. To take something that didn't belong to them and make it part of their story. As if my hard-earned peace was a party favor. I owed them. After I left the confrontation at the wedding, after I walked out of that hallway and back into the hall, head high, I didn't go to my table. I didn't stay for dinner. I called. A car got in and rode straight home. When the elevator opened into my penthouse, I stepped inside and stood there, breathing. It was quiet, clean, mine. And in that moment, I promised myself something I should have promised long ago. This place is not a gift. It is not a bargaining chip. It is not something to apologize for. It is my home, and I will not give away the one thing that finally made me feel safe just because it makes other people uncomfortable, especially not people who only remember I exist when I have something they want. There's something almost sacred about the hours before a wedding. Everyone is dressed up, excited, a little nervous, buzzing like champagne glasses just waiting to clink. I arrived at the venue early, as instructed because of course they had a family photo session scheduled before the guests started pouring in. I wore a soft green dress that I chose specifically because it didn't stand out. I didn't want to outshine the bride. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to show up, smile, support my brother, and leave without incident. I should have known better. As soon as I walked into the back corridor where they told me to wait for the photographer, I felt it, that stillness.
The same kind I
Used to feel as a child when I had done something wrong, and my parents were about to let me know just how disappointed they were. Only this time, I hadn't done anything wrong. I had just brought my boundaries with me. My father and mother appeared at the end of the hallway. My mother smiled too wide. My father didn't smile at all. We wanted to speak with you privately.
He said, not asked, said. I nodded and followed them into a small, unused dressing room.
It smelled of old perfume and flower arrangements. They stood together in front of the vanity mirror. My mother folded her hands neatly. My father kept his arms behind his back, the way he did when he was preparing to reason with someone like a disappointed CEO. We've been thinking, my mother started, about Nathan and Callie. My father took over. They're starting a family. You know that. And they've been struggling to find a place that feels right. I nodded slowly. That's what I heard. My mother pressed forward. They're good people, Isabella. Kind, practical, ready to build a life together. Unlike, she trailed off, her eyes flicking toward me like a blade. My stomach turned. I saw the shape of it before they said the words. But even then I wasn't ready. You should give them the apartment, my father said plainly. I blinked. I'm sorry? The penthouse, he repeated. You don't really need it. You don't have a family? You're alone. Nathan and Callie would make good use of it. Consider it a wedding gift, from you to them. It would mean so much. My heart stopped, and then thudded painfully. Give my home to them? My mother leaned in, as if I wasn't understanding. We're not saying forever. Well, not necessarily. Just think of how happy it would make them. It's such a big space, and you've always said you don't even use the guest bedrooms. It's just sensible, generous, family-oriented. I stood frozen, trying to understand if this was really happening. If my parents, the same people who had never helped with a single down payment, who never visited unless there was some event to benefit from, were standing here asking me to hand over my life's work because my brother was getting married? Why? Would you think that's okay? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. My father narrowed his eyes. Because we raised you better than to hoard something when someone you love needs it more. That's not love, I replied. That's entitlement.
and
Then my mother did something I will never forget. She sighed dramatically and said, We always knew you'd grow up to be selfish. All that independence you cling to. It's a mask. You're just afraid to be needed. That one cut deeper than I expected, but I didn't flinch. I stood up straighter and said, I won't be giving away my home to anyone. They stared at me like I just spat on the altar. My father's voice turned sharp. This is why you're alone. Why you'll always be alone. Because you think protecting what's yours is more important than family. My mother added, You're embarrassing. You'll show up today in that expensive dress and smile like you belong, but you don't. You never put anyone else first. I looked between them. My parents. The people who raised me, who shaped me, who should have been proud of the woman I became, instead of threatened by her. And then I said quietly, I'm leaving. Don't you dare walk out before your brother's wedding, my father snapped. I'm not walking out of the wedding, I said. I'm walking out of this conversation. And if anyone lays a hand on me today, or tries to shame me in public, you will regret it. My voice didn't shake. But theirs did. They didn't expect that strength from me. They expected the old Isabella, the one who used to cry in her room, wondering why she never felt good enough. But that Isabella died the day I signed my own lease. The day I bought peace with my own money. The day I stopped begging for love. That came with terms and conditions. I opened the door and walked back into the corridor. Behind me, I heard my mother hiss, She ruined everything. And my father mutter, Then we'll handle it. That's when I knew they weren't done. They were going to try again. And they were going to try harder. They hadn't expected resistance. But resistance is what they were going to get. Saying, No, to your parents shouldn't feel like signing a declaration of war. But for me, that word was the first domino. A simple, resolute no, and everything started to unravel. After that confrontation in the dressing room, I returned to the main event with a tight smile and a heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe deeply. I walked out like nothing had happened, nodded at distant cousins, kissed the bride on the cheek, told Nathan he looked handsome in his tux, and found my assigned table like a well-behaved guest. But under the surface, everything had changed. It was like a switch had flipped in my parents. That private rejection, the denial of their reasonable request, became a personal betrayal. And in true fashion, they didn't retreat quietly. They doubled down. They turned it into a mission, one they planned to complete before the night was over. The signs were small at first. Passive-aggressive remarks during the photo session. My mother pulling the makeup artist aside to ask for something that softens her, makes her look less cold. My father making sure to tell the photographer to get one nice shot of Isabella, even if she's just here as a guest. Even Nathan seemed different. He didn't look me in the eyes much. And when I gave him the custom watch I'd commissioned for his wedding, a handmade piece with our late grandfather's initials on the back, he barely nodded, barely thanked me. It didn't matter. I wasn't there for approval. I was there because I loved my brother. Or at least I wanted to. But love isn't a one-way street, and neither is loyalty. The ceremony began. The vows were beautiful, Callie cried. Nathan looked like the golden boy everyone always said he was. And I clapped with everyone else. I stood, I smiled, I toasted. I played the part, but I saw the looks my parents gave me from across the ballroom. The tight-lipped glances, the planning behind their eyes, and I knew they weren't done. I made my way to the restroom between courses, just to breathe. Just to be alone for 5 minutes. That's when they cornered me again, this time near the catering hallway, where few guests passed. There's still time to fix this, my mother said, as if I'd broken something. You can stand up and make an announcement. Hand them the keys. It would mean so much. Think about your brother, my father added. Think about the legacy. You don't have a husband. You don't have children. What is that apartment? Really for? Vanity? It was the second time they tried to make me feel like a mistake. Like I was only valuable if I handed over what I had earned. And once again I said no. Not with cruelty. Not with drama. Just no. And then, in full view of a nearby waiter and 2 guests walking past, my father raised his hand and slapped me. A real slap. Not a dramatic soap opera gesture. A real, jarring hit across the face that echoed more in its silence than its sound. It wasn't the pain that stunned me. It was the quiet afterward. You could feel the air shift. The guests who saw it froze. The waiter dropped a tray. My mother gasped, not out of concern, but because she knew that now it was visible. Now it couldn't be rewritten. I looked at my father. Right in his eyes. No tears. No screaming. I smiled, and I leaned in just enough to whisper, "You just lost me." And I turned around and walked away. The ballroom didn't stop entirely, but it changed. Word spread. Someone whispered to someone else. People turned. People stared. I didn't care. I went outside, called a car, and left the wedding without another word. That was the last time I saw my family as anything close to what I used to think they were. What followed were days of fallout. Texts, calls, messages, denials, excuses. Your father wasn't himself. You made it worse by leaving. Why are you trying to destroy your own family? But I didn't respond. Not at first, because something had snapped, not inside me but around me. The fragile illusion of mutual respect had shattered. And now that it was gone, I couldn't unsee the way they viewed me, not as a daughter or sister, but as a vault, a resource. A symbol of something they thought they deserved by proximity. They didn't love me. They loved what they thought I owed them. And when I refused, I stopped being part of the equation. That no changed everything. It was the moment I stopped trying to play along, to be the peacekeeper, to pretend that being the bigger person meant sacrificing myself. That night, I ordered locks changed that week. I had my building security upgraded. And in that month, I began legal proceedings, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood they weren't going to stop. Not until they were forced to. There are moments in life that become frozen in memory not because of their duration, but because of the impact they leave behind. That slap, the one my father delivered in front of waiters, guests, and chandeliers glittering above, became one of those moments, not just because it hurt, but because it ended something. I didn't even feel the sting at first. It was as if my body had stepped outside itself, looking down from some invisible perch. I saw myself take the blow. I heard the sharp collective intake of breath from the people nearby, but I didn't register it as pain, not yet. It was the final click of a lock turning, the sound that said, "Nothing will ever be the same after." This dot I stood there, cheeks hot from the slap and embarrassment, though I wouldn't let either show. My hand didn't fly to my face, my eyes didn't water. I simply stared at my father, his palm still hovering in the air like he wasn't sure what he'd just done, and then I smiled. A strange, composed smile that frightened even me. "You just lost me," I whispered. And I meant every syllable. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't want one. I didn't care what they had to say, or if my mother tried to hush him or play it off. I turned, walked through the crowd of unsuspecting guests, and slipped out. Through the lobby like a ghost, but ghosts don't disappear quietly, not when there are 200 guests, holding phones and glassy stares. Not when the bride's sister leaves the wedding with a red mark on her face and a calmness too eerie to ignore. By the time I got into the car, notifications had already started. A cousin texted, "Are you okay?" A college friend who happened to be a guest sent, "WT's happened?" Someone else posted a vague tweet about violence at a wedding and tagged the location. The storm had begun and I hadn't lifted a finger. I spent that night at a hotel. Not because I was scared. I just needed space to feel safe again. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling, going over every second of the confrontation. Not to relive it, but to make sure I hadn't exaggerated it in my mind. I hadn't. If anything, the reality was worse than I allowed myself to feel. It wasn't just the slap. It was everything behind it. The entitlement, the manipulation. The idea that I owed them something simply because I had something they wanted. That they could punish me for saying no because in their minds, I was theirs to command. That realization was more painful than the hit. The next morning, I woke up to my name trending. Not nationally, thank God, but locally just enough to make it unavoidable. A video had surfaced the moment my father hit me. The words weren't audible, but the action was undeniable. No context, no explanation. Just the raw image, a father, striking his grown daughter in the middle of what should have been a celebration. My inbox exploded. Support, questions, gossip, even anger. Some people demanded I speak out. Others begged me to forgive him because he's still your father. But that was the thing, he wasn't. Not anymore. Not in the way a father should be. The rest of the family began to scramble. My mother called me 12 times. My brother once. Even Callie, his new bride, sent a message trying to smooth things over. "He's under a lot of pressure," she wrote. "Maybe we all just need time to breathe." I never answered. Instead, I called my lawyer. We discussed the video. The public location, the guests, the witnesses. The career my father had spent decades building. He was a figure in the local government, respected, untouchable. Until now, within 48 hours, several advocacy groups reached out to me. They had seen the video. They offered resources, representation, even a chance to speak at an upcoming domestic violence forum. I declined for the moment. I wasn't ready to turn pain into performance, but I wasn't going to pretend either. I filed a formal police report. My father was notified of the investigation. The video had done half the work. His reputation began to crumble almost instantly. Statements were made, press releases issued. The institution he worked for placed him on indefinite leave. Then the mayor's office released a generic condemnation of personal conduct unbecoming of public servants. He tried to spin the narrative, of course. Family dispute, he called it. A misunderstanding. But the video had no audio end. Somehow that made it worse. Because everyone watching could fill in the silence with their own version. And none of them were flattering. My father's supporters fell quiet. His colleagues stopped responding to emails. Even my mother, so vocal at first, withdrew into herself. She didn't call as much. Maybe she realized the line had been crossed. And couldn't be uncrossed. Mathan, my brother, was the last to reach out. He came to my door one evening, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "I didn't know they were going to do that," he said. "The whole apartment thing. I didn't ask them to." I believed him, but it didn't change anything. "You didn't stop it either," I replied. "You let it happen." He looked down, unable to argue. Then he left. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, but it was necessary. A purge, a cleansing of everything I used to tolerate in the name of being a good daughter, a team player, family. Now the slap had become a symbol A dividing line. Before that day, I still believed I could fix my family. After, I finally accepted that some things aren't broken, they're designed to hurt you when they don't get what they want. I wasn't the villain. I was simply the first person to say no, and I wasn't going back. When I said those words, you just lost me. I don't think my father understood what I meant. I don't think anyone in that moment fully grasped what had just happened. They saw a scene, a scandal maybe, a moment of family dysfunction under stress. But for me, it was more than a reaction. It was a decision, a vow made in silence. I had said no many times before, quietly, politely, trying not to stir things. I had always hoped that one day my boundaries would be respected, that they'd see me not as a problem, not as competition, not as some selfish daughter who'd forgotten where she came from, but as a person. A woman, someone who built something on her own and deserved the right to keep it. But that slap made it clear. I could be erased for disobedience. After I left the ballroom, I didn't cry. Not once. I didn't tremble, didn't rant, didn't text anyone. I walked back to my hotel room, removed my makeup slowly, and stared at my own reflection under the soft bathroom light. My cheek was still red, slightly swollen. But that wasn't the part that hurt. What hurt was the certainty I felt. That this wasn't new. That it had always been there. This pattern of entitlement. Of seeing me not as family, but as a resource. Someone to be used, gifted, manipulated. And maybe the worst part was how long I had allowed it. As a child, I was always the one to apologize first, even when it wasn't my fault. When my brother broke things and blamed me, I stayed silent. When my parents favored him, I told myself it was normal. That maybe I was just more independent or less needy. But the truth is, I learned early that obedience equaled love. And anytime I pushed back, they withdrew. So I stopped pushing. Until now. That slap was a line drawn in public. And my smile, my whisper, my walkout? That was the answer they never expected. I didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from guests, relatives, colleagues. Some said they were proud. Others asked if I would forgive him. One aunt even told me, "You need to understand he was just under stress." Weddings are emotional, but stress doesn't create violence. It reveals it. I spent those 3 days in silence, letting the world spin around me. I went to the rooftop of my penthouse every evening and sat with the city lights. The view one had worked so hard for felt different now. Not just beautiful, but earned, untouchable, mine, on the 4th day. I got a letter from my mother. Yes, a physical letter. The handwriting was shaky, emotional. She said she hoped I was ready to be mature and put things behind us. That family moments shouldn't be taken out of context. That if I didn't want to give the apartment, that was fine, but I had humiliated them by refusing at such a sacred moment. She called it sacred, not abusive, not violent, not humiliating for me, but for them. That was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about power. I had disrupted the hierarchy. I had taken away their leverage. And instead of apologizing, they doubled down. I sent her letter back, untouched, with a post-it. "You didn't lose a daughter. You lost control." Not the same thing. A few days later, my lawyer filed for a restraining order. It wasn't permanent, just long enough to give me space, legally and emotionally. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet. And I wanted them out of my sky. The media attention faded, eventually. The story stopped trending. The video was replaced by newer dramas. But what lingered was the shift in my life. My voice, which I had buried under years of family unity and tradition, had finally broken free. For the first time in years, I slept well. No phone calls demanding explanations. No guilt trips in group chats. No subtle jabs about my career, my success, my attitude. I got back to work. My clients, many of whom had seen the story, sent flowers and notes of solidarity. One of them, a CEO I admired, wrote, "Thank you for showing us how grace doesn't mean silence." I printed that message and pinned it in my home office. My brother sent one last message. "I know it's complicated," he wrote, "but I'm still your brother." I didn't answer. Because love without respect isn't family. It's manipulation dressed as loyalty. Weeks turned into months. I didn't just move on. I built higher. I repainted my walls. I bought myself a ridiculous espresso machine. I invited new people into My life who knew nothing about that slap, only about my laughter, my strength, my taste in jazz. But the best part? I stopped apologizing for being happy, that moment at the wedding. The sound of the slap, the whisper that followed, they became my freedom. The final chapter of a book I never chose to be written in. I didn't lose a family. I released a chain, and when people ask me now, didn't it hurt to walk away? I say, it hurt more to stay. The morning after the wedding I woke up to over 80 unread messages and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, I assumed they were more family members trying to do damage control. But then I opened the first message from a coworker I hadn't spoken to in months. Isabella, you're trending on Twitter. And not because of your firm's expansion. Check the videos. I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. Trending? I hadn't posted anything. But when I opened the app, I saw it dot multiple angles dot my father's voice.
His slap, my face turning slowly, not from the impact, but from the deliberate control I kept.
Then my whisper, crystal clear. You just lost me. The entire scene had been caught on more than one phone. And at least 2 guests, who I barely remembered from the crowd, had uploaded it before I even made it back to the hotel. One video already had 700,000 views. The comments were a whirlwind. She handled that with such power, iconic. Did he just slap her for saying no to a gift? I want to be as unbothered as this woman when faced with abuse in front of 200 people. The hashtags began forming. Hashtag you just lost me, hash penthouse slap, hash Isabella deserves better. It wasn't just internet noise. Celebrities started reposting it. Lawyers weighed in. Women who had been publicly humiliated by their own families stitched their own stories beneath mine. It wasn't just a moment, it became a symbol. At first, I didn't know what to feel. Empowered, embarrassed, exposed. But then I saw a message from a teenage girl that stopped me cold. It read, I showed your video to my mom, she cried. She said she wished she had walked away when her father hit her. Thank you for showing us how, and that was when the shame melted. That was when I realized I hadn't been alone at all. I had been just one voice in a choir that had been silenced. Too long. By mid-afternoon, reporters were calling. Local news stations sent email after email asking for an interview. I declined them all. I didn't want to turn this into a spectacle. But I also didn't want to stay silent. So instead, I made a single post, a photo of the city skyline from my penthouse, and a caption, the view is clearer when no one is screaming at you to give it away. The post exploded. And that explosion had consequences. My father, who held a senior position in a public agency, faced a formal investigation by the ethics board after the video went viral.
His image as a family man and community figure was shattered.
Overnight, a petition for his resignation gathered. 50,000 signatures in less than 2 days. My brother tried to delete his social media after. Kali posted a tone-deaf photo of her in a wedding gown with the caption, blessed beyond words. The comments section didn't hold back. Was the slap part of the blessings? Enjoy your gifted wedding while your wife's sister gets assaulted in public. I hope your honeymoon came with self-awareness. They were dragged not just digitally but professionally. My brother's company, a family business my father helped fund, was flooded with bad reviews and public complaints. Clients pulled out. A major investor issued a statement cutting ties due to values misalignment. Kali tried to reach out to me, through email, through mutual friends, even through her own mother. All the messages had the same undertone. Let's not let this one incident destroy the family. But that wasn't the truth. It wasn't one incident. It was the culmination. The slap was just the grand finale to years of manipulation, neglect, and disrespect. My inbox filled with invitations to speak at conferences about family boundaries, women's empowerment, trauma recovery. I said yes to 2. Not because I wanted to be famous, but because I wanted to help women recognize that protecting your space isn't selfish. It's survival. One day, someone slid a handwritten note under my door. No name. No return address. It said, you didn't deserve that. We were there, we saw. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for not making excuses for him. Because we needed someone to remind us that you don't owe anyone your peace. I kept that note inside the front drawer of my kitchen, right beside the copies of the restraining order I'd later file, but the biggest surprise came 3 weeks later. The HR department at my father's workplace contacted me. They asked if I'd be willing to speak as part of their internal investigation. I agreed. I gave them the facts, calmly, professionally, without embellishment. A week after that meeting, my father resigned to spend more time with family. The irony was not lost on me. The last time I saw him was in a courtroom hallway. Not because I wanted to press criminal charges, but because I had filed for a protective order, and he had contested it. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. In energy. He didn't speak to me. He didn't look at me. I stood there in silence, my lawyer beside me. As the judge read the summary and granted my request, the order was for 12 months, but I knew I'd never need to renew it. I had already built walls far higher than the legal system could imagine. Walls made of clarity, of dignity, of people who saw me not as a resource, but as a human being. I no longer felt like I had lost something. I felt like I had been found, and maybe, just maybe, others found themselves through me too. I never once raised my voice. Not when my father slapped me. Not when my mother called me cruel for not forgiving him 2 days later. Not when my brother had the audacity to ask, "You know, Dad didn't mean it, right?" As if his hand had accidentally traveled through the air and struck my face in front of 200 witnesses. No, I stayed silent. But I wasn't idle. Silence is only weakness when it comes with surrender. Mine came with preparation. I hired a lawyer. Not a family friend, not someone local. I wanted someone clinical, brilliant, and with zero emotional ties to anything that bore my last name. Her name was Naomi Roth, and the first thing she said to me was, "If we're doing this, we do it without apology. Are you sure?" I was sure. I wasn't just filing for a restraining order. I was launching a civil suit for public assault and defamation because, yes, the slap was physical, but the verbal venom that came before it had circulated long before any video. My family had spent years downplaying my work, my success, my relationships. I was too independent, too cold, too full of herself. And now they had given me proof that all of that resentment had a purpose, because they were building a narrative where I deserved to be punished for having something they didn't. The lawsuit was just the beginning. When Naomi asked me to compile any documents, emails, or communications that could support the pattern of harassment and coercion, I gave her a hard drive. 3 years of saved texts, voice notes, and emails. I hadn't realized how much I had saved until she played one of the older voicemails from my mother. "You should really think about doing something nice for your brother this year, honey. Maybe let him stay in your place while they get settled. You don't need all that space." I used to dismiss it as guilt tripping. Now, it was evidence. Naomi also asked me, "Do you want to involve the press?" I thought about it carefully. I didn't want to be the woman from the slap video for the rest of my life, but I did want my story to mean something. So we gave an exclusive interview, just one. A long-form piece with context, boundaries, and an ironclad NDA with the journalist. When it ran, it wasn't sensational. It was surgical. It told my story plainly, how emotional abuse isn't always screaming behind closed doors. Sometimes it's expectations disguised as tradition. Sometimes it's the violent demand that you hand over your peace, dressed up as family values. And the fallout? It was exactly what I expected, and far more. The company my father had served for 31 years issued a public statement acknowledging the incident, apologizing to their employees and community, and affirming their internal policy on violence and harassment. His resignation, once painted as retirement, was now labeled a departure following internal review. More quietly, my brother's business suffered beyond the online backlash. Turns out, many of the silent investors behind his boutique design firm had watched the same videos and decided they no longer wanted to align their names with his. 2 pulled out. A third one demanded buyout. Then came the audits. Naomi had flagged something strange. Shared financial accounts in my parents' name linked to a shell company. The more we looked, the more inconsistencies we found. Not criminal yet, but messy enough that we passed it to a tax attorney who passed it to federal agents. I didn't expect anything to come from it. Honestly, I thought it might be a dead end, until one morning my mother called from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. "You think you've won? You think because you've embarrassed your own family that you're better than us? Your father built everything you have. Don't forget that. We made you." That voicemail became Exhibit F in our case. The financial investigation uncovered years of gifted money that had never been reported, tuition for Nathan, car down payments, fake consulting fees routed to relatives. The firm that paid for my father's travel and events wasn't just a community development organization. It was also a family piggy bank. Soon, the IRS got involved. Not because of me, but because when you pull one loose thread, the whole scarf begins to unravel. I hadn't wanted this. I wanted to be left alone. But now that it was happening, I realized it was necessary. My revenge wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about shouting back. It was about putting every piece of their entitled, controlling empire under a microscope until it burned, and quietly. I watched it all collapse. At a hearing 6 months later, my father sat across from me, visibly aged. No tie, no ring. My mother wasn't with him. My brother wasn't either. Cully had deleted all her accounts, and rumor had it they'd split up during a massive argument about not being gifted the penthouse after all, the judge ruled. In my favor, he called the slap an act of public aggression with clear malice. He granted full restitution, legal fees, and publicly acknowledged the harm caused not just in that moment, but through the cumulative pattern of manipulation. The courtroom clapped. Not loud, just a few people. But enough to remind me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I was free. After the verdict, Naomi turned to me and said, "Most people don't go through with this. They flinch, they settle. You didn't." I smiled, for real this time. I wasn't taught how to fight back, but I taught myself. That night I sat alone on my rooftop terrace. The city buzzed beneath me. I could see the wedding venue from where I sat, just the edge of it. So close. And yet a world away. I poured myself a glass of wine and texted Naomi, "We're not done yet. I want to start a foundation for women like me, for stories like this." She replied, "Already drafting the paperwork." And that was the real revenge. Not what I took from them, but what I built without them. I didn't buy that penthouse to prove anything to anyone. Not to my family, not to the city, not even to myself. I bought it because, after years of renting, sacrificing, living frugally, and working 80-hour weeks building something from the ground up, I wanted a place that would finally be quiet, not silent, just quiet. A place where no one knocked on my bedroom door demanding help with chores I never volunteered for. Where no one rolled their eyes when I brought home a work promotion. Where I didn't have to dim myself to avoid making others feel small. When I signed the deed, I remember thinking, this is the first thing I've ever had that's truly mine. But from the very beginning, my family didn't see it that way. To them, it was a trophy, a status symbol, a statement that I had gone too far. I still remember my mother's voice during the first phone call after I told her I'd bought it. "You really think you need all that space? For what? To be alone and brag about it?" That was the tone, not celebration, not pride, accusation. They never saw the struggle, the all-nighters, the rejections, the years I went without vacations. They saw a view and high ceilings and assumed I must have cheated to get it, but the truth is, I earned that home brick by brick. And what I truly built wasn't walls, it was a boundary. Every time I chose solitude over drama, I was building. Every time I turned down invitations that felt like obligations, I was building. Every time I walked away from people who demanded more than they gave, I was laying foundation. So when they tried to take it, not by force, not by law, but by guilt, entitlement, and shame, they thought they were asking for square footage. But what they were really demanding was access to my peace, my boundaries, my hard-earned distance from their chaos. And that's why I said no. Not because I needed to live in a penthouse, but because I refused to give up what it represented, what I fought for. After the lawsuit ended, I stood on the rooftop one night and watched the city breathe below. I realized how far I had come, not just in miles or status, but in clarity. And I finally saw the penthouse for what it truly was, not a fortress, not a trophy, but a reflection of freedom. It was never about marble countertops or glass walls. It was about the silence that filled the space, a silence that wasn't empty but full of autonomy, full of choice, full of peace. Peace isn't something loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't parade through a wedding venue slapping people or shouting about loyalty. Peace is the sound your own thoughts make when no one else is trying to rewrite your story. And that's what I had now. When I invited friends over, they didn't ask how much the place cost. They asked about the artwork on the walls. They noticed the shelves filled with books I loved, the plants I'd kept alive for years. They felt at ease, because I was at ease. No one asked for keys. No one questioned why I lived alone. No one suggested I share the space with someone who needed it more. Because in the right rooms, peace isn't seen as selfish. It's seen as sacred. I still remember the last time I saw my father. It was outside the courthouse. He didn't speak, just stared. I nodded once, not in forgiveness but in farewell. That was the moment I knew he couldn't reach me anymore. Not because I had bodyguards or court orders, but because I'd built something stronger. Life where I didn't owe anyone access just because we shared DNA. A mind that no longer needed to bend to keep others comfortable. A future that was finally mine to design. Without edits. The penthouse was never the goal. The goal was never waking up afraid of the next emotional ambush. The goal was sitting on my terrace, watching the sunrise and knowing, truly knowing, that no one was coming to take it away, and if they tried, they'd find the door locked. Not out of pettiness, out of peace. There was a time, not so long ago, when I would replay every fight, every insult, every raised eyebrow from my family like a broken film reel in my head. I'd lie awake thinking maybe if I had just explained it better, maybe if I had softened my tone, maybe if I had smiled more, bent more, sacrificed more, maybe they would have seen me, valued me, loved me in the way I needed. But the truth is, people who see you only as a resource, not a person, will never be satisfied with what you give. They will always demand more, until you are emptied out, voiceless, exhausted, and stripped of what makes you, you. And I was done playing that role. The trial ended quietly. My father pled out to avoid more humiliation. The family fractured along the cracks that had always been there, just painted over with years of performance. Nobody called to apologize. Not even my brother Nathan. The same brother who had smiled as I was slapped at his wedding, the same one who never once said, "That wasn't okay." I realized then, silence is not neutrality. It is alignment. But freedom, real freedom, begins when you stop waiting for people to see your side and start building your own stage. That's exactly what I did. The penthouse that once felt like a fortress became something entirely new, a sanctuary. Not just for me, but for others like me. I began hosting dinners for women who were told they were too much, book clubs with people who had walked away from toxic families, strategy sessions with entrepreneurs who'd had to build alone because no one in their circle believed in them. We shared food, laughter, and sometimes silence. The good kind, the kind that doesn't feel like rejection, but like understanding. I got certified in trauma-informed coaching. I started a small podcast, then a workshop series called Room at the Top, because I wanted people to know you don't have to climb alone. And you don't have to apologize when you finally make it. I've had women cry on my rooftop. I've had strangers bring their mothers saying, "She needs to hear you." I've had teenage girls write to me, telling me my story made them realize they weren't crazy for feeling unseen in their own homes. And I always tell them the same thing. You are not too much. They were too small. There was this moment a few months ago when I stood near the edge of my rooftop terrace with a glass of wine in hand, watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the skyline. A friend had just left. She was a single mom, rebuilding after leaving an abusive marriage. We had talked, cried, and laughed over takeout, and as she hugged me goodbye, she said, "Thank you for showing me what safety looks like." That stayed with me, because that's all I ever wanted. Not applause, not status, not even revenge. Just safety. And now I have it. Built it. Protected it. That's the thing they never understood. My parents, my brother, the people who once called me selfish. They thought the apartment was the prize. But the real reward was knowing I could stand in a room full of people, be disrespected, hit, and humiliated, and still walk out with my integrity intact. That was the moment. I became unbreakable. I still get calls sometimes. Blocked numbers. Messages from old cousins trying to make peace on behalf of the family. Once, I received a card in the mail from my mother, no return address. Just one sentence inside, "You didn't have to destroy us." I didn't. They destroyed themselves. All I did was finally stop protecting them from the consequences of their own cruelty. And now? Now I spend my evenings on my rooftop, playing old jazz records, sipping mint tea, and watching the lights flicker across the city. Sometimes I host, sometimes I sit alone. But every presence is intentional, every invitation earned, every laugh. Honest. No more forced family holidays, no more fake smiles. No more making space for people who'd never do the same for me. Today, the only voices I hear up here are kind ones, encouraging ones, my own included. And when someone asks, Isabella, aren't you ever lonely up here? I smile. No, I say. Because I'm finally not surrounded by people who made me feel alone while they were standing right beside me.